Hi, Jim. I think we can start the next session. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome to our 5th session on how the recovery is playing out in some of our most iconic protected areas. One of the things that we are observing, or have observed actually, is that when at the onset of the pandemic, the majority of the travelers, especially with tour operators, they postponed their trips versus they canceled their trips. And so they were waiting on the sidelines, ready to go. And as the pandemic has eased in some destinations, so has the reappearance of overtourism, especially fueled by domestic travelers. And so what the pandemic has also created is a systemic and market-based opportunity for protected area managers, communities, the travel industry, its massive supply chain, to achieve the mission of and recalibrate tactics to protect natural and cultural resources, provide quality visitor experiences, and benefit local communities. Today, we are honored to have a panel of experts who provide their insights on the challenges and opportunities to affect meaningful long-term change. And so first we have Dr. Martha Honey, the Director for Responsible Travel Consulting. Over to you, Martha.
Thank you very much. Let me just pull up my PowerPoint, I hope. Great. So I'm going to speak about, in the few minutes I have, look at overtourism with a focus on the U.S. national park system. And the central argument is that the U.S. national parks have proved to be highly susceptible to overtourism, both before, during, and after, as we begin to emerge from the pandemic. But at the same time, I think I would argue that the National Park Service is also better equipped than other types of destinations, many other types of destinations, to effectively deal with overtourism. So there is this kind of dichotomy of, yes, it is vulnerable, but it also seems to have the capacity to and the tools to deal with overtourism. This grows out of a book that I was privileged to edit along with Kelsey Frankiel, who is the program manager at CREST. And the book was just published in May of this year by Island Press, which is the U.S. leading publisher on sustainability and the environment. And the book itself includes overview essays for the chapters by leading travel writers, and then about 24 case studies from around the world of overtourism. So what is overtourism, at least as we define it? It's more than just simply overcrowding. It is an excess of tourism that causes degradation to the environment and quality of life. And it is often due, at least in part, to poor management or a lack of governance. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen a confluence of a number of short and long-term factors that have come together to create a kind of perfect storm that has led to overtourism. These include the continuing growth in the number of travelers, both domestic and international, cheap airlines, the growth of the cruise industry and of Airbnbs, and an explosion of social media tools, among other factors. In looking at which places are affected by overtourism, it's certainly not everywhere in the world, and the impact has been uneven. But in doing our book, we identified 5 different types of destinations that seem particularly vulnerable to overtourism: parks and protected areas, beaches and coastal communities, historic cities, World Heritage sites, and some national and regional destinations. In terms of the causes of overtourism in national parks, particularly the U.S. national parks, one of the factors is that the visitation to the park has jumped 40% just in the last decade, from 327 million, from 287 million up to 327 million in 2019. And the reasons for overtourism include a number of factors: the close proximity of many parks to urban areas, affordability, the ease of access, increase in international visitors to our national parks, and a tremendous growth of social media that have in particular included Instagram posts, bucket lists, and selfies that are promoting particular parks or particular parts of parks, what we can call sort of the marquee parks, places like Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Zion, Yosemite, Rocky Mountain, and Acadia, all of which have experienced up until 2019 increasing numbers of visitors. And this has led to what can be called greenlock or gridlock in natural areas. In terms of tackling over tourism, we saw the national park system actually begin to do so well before the pandemic. The number of visitors to the parks, as I said, had jumped, and they began applying various techniques. They have well-developed strategies within the park system, the U.S. park system being the oldest in the world, over a century old. And so their management systems are well-honed and well-developed, and they were able to develop tools for overtourism to use in many of the parks. One of the tools used is known as the Visitor Use Management System, and this includes kind of the 3 E's of using education, engineering, and enforcement. By engineering, that means helping travelers in planning trips via new websites, signage, and digital platforms, through advanced reservations, and also to help steer visitors to less crowded parks. In terms of engineering, this involved new, improved, or redesigned roads, parking areas, shuttle services, park entrances, and visitor centers. In Yellowstone, for instance, one of the park entrances developed a fast lane for those with park passes, modeled after the Easy Pass system used on highways in this country. And the third, E, enforcement, involved tools such as reservation systems, managed access, permitting, and visitor caps. So all of these tools were being put into place, were in the works, and efforts were underway before the pandemic to try to address overtourism in our national parks. But with the pandemic, of course, we went literally overnight from overtourism to no tourism. And one of the phenomena that we saw in the national parks here, and of course other places around the world, was that wildlife came out of the hills and down onto roads that had once been occupied by tourists and by traffic and were now empty. And they even wandered, in some cases, outside the park into gateway communities. And in the marine protected areas and sanctuaries in this country, we also received reports of the waters being much clearer. The increase seemed to be an increase in fish, in wildlife, in turtles, in birds. But all of this kind of Garden of Eden moment in many of the parks, proved to be very short-lived. It just didn't last very long. And instead, what we've seen is a return, as tourism has returned, not the way it was before, but with a new normal. It has come back with new demands, new desires on the part of the travelers, and also some new realities in terms of the destinations. And this has affected the national parks in terms of the types of destinations that are most likely to see reemergence of overtourism. I would say in this country, we're seeing it most in the national parks and also in beaches. And national parks, because they are easy to drive to, outdoors, healthy settings, small groups, and social distancing is possible. So all of this has led to, unfortunately, a resurgence of overtourism in a number of the parks. And at the same time, the national parks do have the capacity, as I was outlining earlier, to to continue to develop tools to deal with over-tourism. And this is what they have done. They sort of picked up where they were before the pandemic and have begun to use some of the same tools to address over-tourism. According to Donald Ledbetter, who is the tourism head for the National Park System, he says that the VUM tools of education, engineering, and enforcement that were used pre-pandemic are now being used post-pandemic for trying to deal with over-tourism. So the general framework for how to deal with over-tourism has remained largely the same, but there is a much stronger emphasis, of course, on public health in terms of what they're doing. And there also is a stronger emphasis on giving lots of local leeway to the parks to do what they feel needs to be done at the local level, at the park level. For instance, what we've seen is in the Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, they have for the first time are using timed entry permit systems and also advanced reservations for campsites and other facilities. And in Yellowstone, they've developed a 3-phase COVID-19 reopening plan in close consultation with the surrounding communities, and also with a strong emphasis on the health conditions and meeting the health demands.
Just 1 minute left, please, Martha.
Okay, thank you. So what we've seen is that we're continuing to see in the national parks a kind of dual effort going on. One is to address, one is two realities going on. One is the reality of continuing over-tourism, but also the reality that the parks are in a good position to try to address, better than a lot of other institutions, to try to address over-tourism because they have strong public support, because they have guaranteed funding from the US Congress, and because they have a long history of management. That's it. Thank you very much. And now I think we're going to turn it over to John Kelly, who's going to talk about One National Park, Acadia in Maine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martha. And yes, we're going to have next up is John Kelly, who is a management assistant for Acadia National Park, one of the iconic parks that Martha mentioned that is in the northeastern part of the US in the state of Maine. So over to you, John.
Okay, I'm not able to share my screen yet. I got it now. Thanks. I trust everyone can see that.
Yes, that's great. Thanks, John.
Great, thank you. Just like to say good evening and thank you for this opportunity to participate in this important discussion. As was mentioned, there are very high levels of visitation at Acadia, have been a critical issue for a number of years. The resurgence of visitation due to COVID has only exacerbated this growing issue. Tonight, I want to focus on actually a success story, a particular visitor use management tool that has been executed this year very well in the face of over-tourism. And to start, I just would like to also just give you a little background and context for Acadia National Park. As was mentioned, the park is located in the northeastern part of the United States. It's on the Atlantic coast in the state of Maine. And notably, it is within a day's drive of more than 50 million people, a mostly urban population. So this has been a huge driver for people in urban areas seeking out recreation in the outdoors away from urban areas and being only a day's drive from Acadia National Park. The park system was established in 1916. There are 423 units across every state and territory, covers 85 million acres. And in 2019, which was the next highest visitation for the Park Service, we had 328 million visits. Acadia, like other parks, is part of the National Park System that includes a diverse array of natural, cultural, and recreational resources that embody the heritage of the United States. From Yellowstone, pictured here, the first national park in the world in 1872, with 2 million acres, to the incredibly small Evers Home National Monument in Alabama, which was established in 2020 to commemorate the lives of two prominent civil rights leaders. So we have a great diversity, and Acadia is a part of that. Acadia was also, like the National Park System, established in 1916. It was the first national park in the East, which is notable. It's also the first national park that was developed from private land and not previously owned federal land. It contains about 50,000 acres and protects beautiful shorelines, lakes, wetlands, and granite-topped mountains. Acadia consists of more than 100 coastal islands in the Schoodic Peninsula on the mainland, but the heart of the park is on Mount Desert Island, where 90% of the visitation occurs. So an already small park has a very high concentration of visitation in a very small area. The park is made up of fee lands, shown in purple on the map, and conservation easements. I'm sorry, the conservation easements shown in purple and the fee lands shown in green, and they stretch nearly 50 miles across the coast of Maine. Visitors access and enjoy the park from a number of networks. We have 136 miles of hiking trails, 45 miles of non-motorized carriage roads that are primarily used by cyclists, and 36 miles of historic motor roads, which is sort of the crux of the visitor experience here and the source of much of the congestion and traffic issues that we have. The park is not only highly visited, but it is one of the smallest national parks in the country, and is typically ranked in the top 10 of most visited. But if you look in this chart here, you'll see that it's actually one of the most densely visited parks, which again is another part of our challenges in managing visitors in a very small location. As of September, year to date this year, our visitation is 63% over 2020, which is understandable because of the low visitation in 2020. But still, 2021 is still 16% higher than 2019. So that's telling us that we are, as others have mentioned, are at an extremely high level of over-tourism in the United States, especially at Acadia. And notably, we're on record to break 4 million visits this year by the time we get through 2021, which is more than 500,000 more visits than we saw in 2018. This trend, though, has been going on for many years. Between 2008, 2018, we saw a growth of 70% in visitation. And while there have been some dips, we continue to see that trend continue. And this has caused us to look forward and look at when and where visits occur. Not only do we have high visitation in a small amount of area, but they're also concentrated. About 75% of our visitation occurs between July and October every year. In response to this, and this was started in 2015 when we began a transportation plan that was a comprehensive look at managing visitor vehicle traffic and parking congestion to improve the visitor experience and protect park resources. The plan proposed a range of management activities that, as Martha described, the 3 E's. And we have been using all of these tools to manage visitors throughout the park. But I also want to focus on one area in particular. Cadillac Mountain is the iconic location in the park. While the transportation covers other parts of the park, Cadillac Mountain is really a great example of where we are rationing visitor access using that 3rd E through a vehicle reservation system. It's the most popular destination in the park, and it's a 3-mile road that travels 1,500 to a 1,500-foot summit, which is the tallest point on the East Coast, and is a road that is narrow, windy, and historic in construction from 1932. Today, all vehicles, except for RVs and cars with trailers, are allowed, which provides an opportunity for people to visit, but also a challenge on what is a historic, narrow road. At the summit, there are 150 parking spaces, along with a gift shop and restrooms. And the summit also offers a number of opportunities for people to enjoy a beautiful panoramic view of the Maine coast. They have interpretive panels and a half-mile paved walk that takes people around the summit. So while visitors have a good experience on foot once they reach the summit, getting there in the past has been another story. And I'll just run through some slides that show you the impact of vehicles rather than pedestrians or cyclists on the park traffic. And these congestion issues are not only an unpleasant experience for visitors, but they also pose safety issues when vehicles can't access, emergency vehicles, park ranger vehicles cannot get through to a potential emergency on the top. The most popular times are sunrise and sunset, which in the darkness at either end of the day poses additional issues. So this is just a sample of what Cadillac Mountain looked like prior to this year. We also had conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians, bikes and vehicles. Over parking caused people to park anywhere they can outside of the designated spaces, which increased erosion, damaged vegetation, and in some cases, people's efforts to park outside of a designated area created some interesting safety issues for themselves. Cadillac Summit Road was under a vehicle reservation system in 2021. It included the entire 3-mile road, and it was intended to address severe road congestion, overparking while improving the visitor experience and safety. Vehicle reservation system was run from May through October. Everything was available online. There were timed entry without a requirement to leave the area. And each reservation was validated by a QR code scanned either on someone's phone or through a printed printout. The reservations were communicated on the recreation.gov website. They had additional information on our park website through news media and social media posts. We
There's 1 minute remaining, John. Thank you.
Developed a pamphlet distributed by the Park Service and tourism partners and road signs for people approaching. We also had to deal with new infrastructure and staffing and being able to scan reservations along the way. So in the end, our reservations were very successful. We sold 200,000 or 85% of them. We reduced, compared to 2013 baseline numbers, we reduced visitation from 534,000 to 488, and the number of cars in one day peaks from 2,400 to 1,700. We got very good reviews on the rec.gov website, and some lessons to be learned is to set reasonable expectations for systems like this, not to expect perfection, be adaptable to changing circumstances, and offer visitors alternative experience if they can't get a reservation. And most importantly, communicate broadly, early, and continually. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And next we have Professor Amran Hamza from the University Technology in Malaysia. So over to you, Amran.
Thank you, and good morning from my part of the world. My topic is regarding domestic over-tourism patterns in Asia or Asia protected areas, and I would like, please, Maddie, to help me with the slides. Next, please. So I will talk about the pre-pandemic or tourism in the pre-pandemic and now the post-pandemic, and in between, I will stress a bit more on what is called the social construct or social construction of nature that has influenced tourist behavior in protected areas in Asia. Next, please. Thank you, Martha, for giving the definition of over-tourism, and it is certainly beyond just numbers, and it is also common in Asia, especially in marine protected areas. You can see that they have all very vulnerable. Southeast Asia is very popular for island coastal tourism, and the common problems like improperly treated sewage and the depletion of marine ecosystems, and also the problems of overcrowding, congestion, and irresponsible tourist behavior is common across the region. So next, please. This has led to even temporary closures. I think the very famous Koh-Phi or Phi Islands, where they filmed the beach starring the very young Leonardo DiCaprio then was filmed, and Boracay Island in Philippines had to be closed for several months. And this was before the pandemic. I do not know what is the situation now, but I think the pandemic has given them a more breathing space. But it is, I believe, it's just only the tip of the iceberg, because all over Southeast Asia, many marine protected areas are on the verge or at the tipping points of the over-tourism. And there have been attempts in the past of using carrying capacity, whether or not it is not using the right tool, or whether or not they are not focusing on real issues. That is another problem. Next, please. So this is also a common phenomenon in many protected areas in Asia, in which sustainable tourism is usually, you can see it in the form of a thin end of the wedge. This is Royal Bloom State Park, which aspires to be inscribed in the World Heritage List next year. And this is one boat which is taking tourists. And now, you know, as more tourists come in, and the government felt that they needed to provide infrastructure. So next, rather than build a solid infrastructure, there's a temporary pontoons will do it. But again, it is doing the same, causing the same impact and bringing more tourists to the very narrow passages leading to the hinterland, leading to the more, what do you call this, dense forest. So this is common all over PAs in Asia. Next, please. The technique of carrying capacity has also been widely used in visitor management, but mainly he has focused more on the coming up with a magic number and eventually not knowing what to do with the numbers in terms of management strategies. This is on Sipadan Island, among the top 5 diving sites in the world. Next, please. But if you look at closely, maybe we have been focusing too much. 120 divers are allowed on Sipadan, not based on any scientific evidence. It's just based on the National Security Council's decision, because this is a very geopolitically sensitive area in between Malaysia, Sabah, and the Philippines. But you look at closely, it is the swimsuits worn by the same 6 divers that appeared in the previous slide, and those very colorful, garish batik diving suits. I don't know how the marine life would react, you know, to this kind of, I think, men behaving, or women also behaving badly. So this is the issue about carrying capacity that is not used effectively. Next, please. I would like now to go into my focus on my presentation, which is about the social construction of nature. And I think I've been looking at this. I don't have time to go into detail of the past work, but it's just to, maybe I'm oversimplifying and saying that, you know, the social construction of nature, especially towards protected areas in Malaysia, when the first national park was established in the 1939, it was all about the usual with solitude, wilderness, being close to nature. But then when the government built, you know, access road directly to the park and bringing in influx of domestic tourists, and then our research showed that the social construction has changed. Taman Negara now is being looked upon as a giant playground for families, and repeatedly we get these answers that, oh, this is a very nice place to have fun with family and friends. And instead of the flora and fauna of the trails that need to be explored, domestic tourists were happy just, you know, going along the canopy walk and swimming with the mahseer fish, feeding the fish, and this has been the popular attractions now at Taman Negara. Next, please. So another protected area, the one I showed before, Royal Belum State Park. I've done a lot of work here, and you can see there's a contrast of the kind of social construction of nature. International tourists whom we interviewed say that they were interested in the refuge, flower, wildlife watching, the nature trails, but domestic tourists, almost 90% of them, they were there because they love to be on the boats, right? Fishing and merriments with friends and family. And that photograph of that houseboat now, there are loads of them on Tasik Kenya, and this is the kind of domestic holidays that you stay 3 days, 2 nights, or up to a week, having fun, merriments, fishing, and nothing to do about appreciating nature, wilderness, and so on. Next, please. So I quickly want to also refer to the work I did. It was IUCN sponsored research almost 10 years ago on the Asian philosophy of protected areas. And just to quickly, the salient point is that we do have a very Asian philosophy of harmony between humans and nature, and the natural areas are believed to be just the manifestations of cultural and spiritual values. If you look at the diagram on the right, and that is the first national park, World Heritage in China, and even the pagoda is allowed by UNESCO because according to the Taoist philosophy, this is a bad area in terms of natural area, and to provide a balance, essence or teji, this is allowed. And this is the difference between how the philosophy of protected areas from the Western perspective and the Asian perspective. Next, please. And because of this philosophy, next, you can see that calligraphy, please go ahead. Sorry. Calligraphy everywhere. It is calligraphy in caves to celebrate the prose of poets. But then when I've been to many of the nature reserves in China, I can see that this could have been used as a form of license for Disneyfication. And then, neon lights and even elevators have been used. So I have to rush now quickly. Next, please. So you can see that through this, I think, exploitation of the philosophy, you have seen that a lot of incompatible users being introduced. And during the pandemic, there have been a lot of surveys being done, and most of the Asian tourists said, yeah, we will change our behavior. But what happened after that is just the same, revenge tourism. Next, please. I just try to finish 1 or 2 slides. And this is the irresponsible tourist behavior that is common in Asia now. Next. And so what we are trying to do is really a very, very huge challenge, how to change the social construction of nature, which requires not only the 3 E's, education, engineering, and enforcement, but the engineering will involve social engineering. So next, please. And this is a project sponsored by UNDP. We're trying to increase the depth of the ecotourism experience through this non-consumptive wildlife tourism, so that we want to change the whole branding of Royal Belum State Park for the industry players, for the tourism players too. Next, please. And finally, let me just conclude that this has been on the left, the traditional roles of PAs in Asia. But now, since all these changes to the tourism behavior, probably we should put public enjoyment as number 2 after conservation. So next, final slide is just to say that there's a lot of work to be done. We have been doing it in the post-COVID landscape, especially now to look at how we can focus on the social construction of nature among domestic tourists in Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hamza. And next we welcome Dr. Bill Borey, an associate professor at Deakin University. And so over to you, Dr. Borey.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. I'm going to reinforce some of the themes that Anna, John, and Martha introduced and expand on visitor use management. The psychological and the physical effects of lockdowns and other interventions in this time of a pandemic, they've been well documented. And one of the clear ways that people have coped and will cope is to seek out and spend quality time in the outdoors. They're the safe places, the safer places. It's a chance to escape from confinement, sanctuary, relief. It's somewhere to feel free and whole. And we're clearly seeing folks are wanting to bond with their family and friends, as well as maintain social distance. Here in Australia, parks were the first places to gather. We needed access to these places. And the local communities are proud and eager to invite visitors back. They urgently seek out the opportunities to restart their businesses and put out the welcome mat. And so it's important that we protect the very qualities that make these protected areas so very important and meaningful today. Our mandate is twofold: to preserve the qualities that make it special and valuable, because that's part of our identity and our heritage. It's part of what makes us us, but also to provide opportunities to use and enjoy them, to learn, to appreciate, to explore. These places are much more than just fun and games. They've always been a mechanism, a place for improving the quality of our lives and of our communities. The benefits of parks and recreation are very well documented. This chart is adapted by John Schultes in 2003, based on the benefits-based management work of Bev Driver and Don Bruns. It's a comprehensive listing of the benefits of sustainable tourism and recreation. And I like this moniker: healthy parks, healthy people. These are the places in which we heal. Let me introduce one of the fundamental ideas of visitor use management. That is that we don't so much want a homogenized, low common denominator, bland set of conditions. It's important to realize that one place can't and shouldn't provide for the full range of tourists. Instead, we should acknowledge and supply a diversity of opportunities. Each park, each location providing a consistent and coordinated set of conditions. This is the ROS, the Recreation Opportunity Spectrum, where conditions range from the primitive, highly natural, low levels of use, low levels of regulation, to the urban, highly modified, high levels of interaction and high levels of service provision, with a number of places in between. And in this way, the special character of each place is recognized and protected. So the visitor use management framework, it is a planning framework, a proactive, not reactive process for identifying what we want to protect and provide and preserve. Initially published by the National Park Service in 2016, but it's a product of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council, the 5 main public land and water management agencies in the United States. 6 steps in the visitor use management framework, and they reflect the approach that has been taken in the management of outdoor recreation and sustainable tourism over 30 years through frameworks such as the limits of acceptable change. First step is the explicit identification and statement of what is being protected. These are the goals, the objectives of sustainable tourism management. And the objectives are taken from law and government policy. That is, what's the legislated mandate? For what specific purposes was the area dedicated? What specific values? For example, the so-called Eastern Wilderness Areas Act of 1975 states the specific values of solitude, physical and mental challenge, scientific study, inspiration, and primitive recreation. Second step is identification of the desired conditions. We need to give specifics of the ecological conditions, not just preservation of the environment. We need to give specifics of the visitor experience, not just count numbers of visitors. And we need to give specifics of what sorts of managerial conditions we want, not just levels of financing, but the degree of development and infrastructure. There's no one ideal set of conditions. We just need to be stating consistently and coordinated what we are striving for. Third step is the identification of indicators. These translate those desired conditions into measurable attributes so that we can track them over time. Indicators are not the quality itself, but they're a sign. They're an indicator. Think of them like a canary in a coal mine. The desired conditions are healthy air, and the canary's behavior tells us about the level of air quality. Fourth step is identification of thresholds or standards. These are the minimally acceptable levels of each indicator, the limits of acceptable change. Thresholds are not ideal or target conditions, but they're markers of when the conditions are out of standard. For instance, we don't accept that the canary is dead. That's an unacceptable level of air quality. Think of thresholds as guardrails. We want to stay away from them. We don't want to be bumping up against them. Visitor Use Management Framework also sets up triggers, where the indicator prompts a management response well before the threshold is reached. And that action helps prevent or reverse the decline in conditions. Visitor Use Management Framework then has us identifying the management strategies that will maintain those desired conditions. Managers and planners need to think in advance how they're going to be prepared to act. And I would add that many argue that limiting use should be a strategy of last resort. Instead, the 3 E's, the 3 sets of strategies, should all be used first. Lastly is monitoring of the desired conditions, using the indicators, asking what's going to be measured and why, where is it going to be measured, who's going to do the measurement, how often are the measurements going to be taken, and what sorts of analysis will be required and who's going to do it. Monitoring is such a big part of the Visitor Use Management Framework. There's a whole guidebook on monitoring. So, Visitor Use Management Framework, it is the current and best professional practice for sustainable outdoor recreation and tourism. And I'd suggest while today's situation is challenging, the need for such a forward-thinking framework is more urgent than ever. I go through the framework because it is a product of a lot of good thinking and application over decades. And I'm concerned that decisions being made in the context of recovery from COVID will be less thoughtful and less based on theory and research, and not done for the benefit of maintaining quality and sustainable tourism experiences. If you'd like to read more, you can download the guide for free and perhaps read our chapter in the Handbook of Sustainable Tourism. Thanks, and I think we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was really excellent. And I'd like to thank all the speakers. Thank you, Martha, John, and Amran as well, for your insights into the resurgence of overtourism in protected areas and crisis recovery. It was really fascinating to hear about the application of the Visitor Use Management Framework and the 3 E's as a practical tool to address overtourism in recovery. And to think, for the first time, I think, Amran, about the impacts of colourful diving suits on fish in coral reefs. I will be careful about my fins in future. Thank you. So we have some really great audience questions, which we're going to dive into, and we'll take as many as we can. So first of all, I'd like to take a question from Jordan Khan, who says that in developing countries, especially in the Caribbean, we've been moving away from sun, sea and sand tourism to nature-based tourism, which is seen as a new economic product to exploit. But it's resulted in over-tourism on our small islands with a major impact. How can conservation organizations work with customers to stop this before the public and private sector to catch up with really implementing sustainable tourism systems? So open the floor. Who would like to respond? Martha, would you like to have a
Thanks.
go at this one?
Yeah, so the question is that overtourism is being caused by nature-based tourism, by ecotourism, is that right?
It says that it is taking place in the small islands. So the question is really about how conservation organizations can work with tourists to stop this, to make sustainable tourism systems take place.
Well, I think it also needs to be with the government, because the government, the Park Service also needs to be involved in terms of, really taking something like the VUM concept and trying to figure out what kind of limits need to be in controls, and what kind of, traffic and building, everything. You need to have a master plan. You need to have a plan for how to address this. But I think you can't leave out government. They've got to be involved as well.
Thank you, Martha. Would anyone else like to dive into this one?
I would like to mention that the challenge is that there's so much out of our control for messaging and communications with social media. As Martha has mentioned before, the challenge is we can communicate through all these channels and use our tourism partners, the Office of Tourism, and all of these resources, but still the more powerful message is coming from someone's Facebook post or Instagram post. And that gets exasperated.
I think sometimes there can be a conflict between one agency saying, please come to our area, and others saying, no, we actually have enough, thank you. We need to manage them differently.
Or what social media is saying, putting out Instagram and Facebook and so on, versus what the Park Service may be trying to say. And I think that's your point, John, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would like to add by saying that I think we should also focus on how do we curb greenwashing, because greenwashing now, I think governments also seem to think that greenwashing means sustainable tourism, and it is not, But so how do you educate governments also that this difference between what is sustainable tourism and what is greenwashing?
Yes.
It's not just about the huge numbers that we saw. We saw very different behaviors from people who really didn't know what a national park was about. And so it wasn't just as people have mentioned, not just the enormous amount of numbers, but it's also the behaviors and the education cycle for a park like Acadia, where we have a lot of repeat visitors who gradually learn over time, was lost on many, many new visitors. First-time visitors.
And these new visitors were people who were, they were just had wanted to get out in nature after being pent up because of the pandemic for so long.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to move to another question. Thank you, which comes from Christopher. He says that overtourism has a negative impact on biodiversity, and he's seen some park authorities increase entrance fees to help regulate the numbers of tourists as a mitigation strategy. So he asks, apart from the visitor use management program framework, what are other commendable strategies which maybe don't affect park revenue to mitigate overtourism's impact on biodiversity? Thank you.
Well, Acadia National Park does charge an entrance fee, as do another 100 or so parks across the system, but it's not intended as a disincentive to visit. A 7-day vehicle pass for a carload of people is $30 for Acadia. So what we've confronted the issue with more onerous, one of those E's is to actually limit through reservations the number of vehicles that can enter Acadia Cadillac Summit Road at any one time, because all the other tools we were using were not effective.
And I would add that I think that there is an underlying current in Christoph's question, which is, as local communities have become dependent on these revenue streams, and management agencies have become dependent on these revenue streams, the pressure to maintain or to increase those revenue streams go up. There are a number of approaches to allocating use, and certainly using differential fee structures is one way of encouraging or discouraging people. But there is an equity question of who can afford the fees, and therefore who is being encouraged and who is being discouraged.
Thank you.
I think that's a
very
really
important
good
point, Bill.
Yes, very important
Particularly
point.
in developing countries.
Yeah, I think.
I would
Sorry.
please go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I also support the view that pricing has got to be related to any form of carrying capacity threshold limit. And in developing countries, we use carrying capacity or limits of settable change without looking into the pricing structure. Once you do that, you can increase yield and reduce volume. But at the same time, do you create an elitist park? So I think that's also the conflicts.
A lot of feedback that we got, because we charged a $6 fee for each vehicle reservation, and it wasn't necessarily the $6 fee, but it was the I guess entitlement or sense that no one should be paying anything to enter a national park. So there's more of a philosophical issue there than a hindrance to enter.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Martha, did you
I
want to
would.
add?
I just wanted to add that this is a really important question. I think, and the equity question. I think that for parks, it is totally reasonable to charge foreign visitors a lot more than locals pay, and that you should have a tiered structure with school kids and others who don't have means being allowed into getting into the parks free or very, very cheaply. But I think it is totally appropriate to have foreign visitors who've traveled a long way to get there pay, what in the scheme of things is not going to be very much, $100 or whatever, to get into to make use of the parks, because they're not paying with their taxes. They're not supporting the parks in any other way. And so I think that one of the challenges is trying to keep it accessible for locals, but uses the revenue stream the foreign visitors who are coming, because they're not going to not go to a park after coming all this way if it's $30 or $100 as opposed to $3 they will pay.
My
Thank you,
reaction
Martha.
to that, Martha, is very localized, because Acadia is 2 hours from Canada. So the local businesses would be absolutely opposed with dissuading Canadians when the Canadian dollar is good, business is good in Bar Harbor. So that's the other side of that issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to try and take one more question before we close, if I may. And there's a lot of questions, so it's hard to select. But there is one regarding local communities. They ask, how does overtourism impact on local communities and residents who live in or adjacent to national parks? And are there any current tools to mitigate those social impacts? If anyone would like to comment. And Amran, I know you've done a lot of work on social impacts of tourism.
Yeah, when overtourism comes to a stage that you have to close the park for a period of time, and you can feel, then you can see that the resentment from local communities will increase. So again, how do you find that balance in trying to manage visitors without causing the detrimental impact on the local communities? But also, I think we must allow the local communities to be part of the mainstream. I think what our work now is they're trying to train the Aborigines in some of our national parks to be able to compete with the mainstream travel operators, because they have been marginalized so far. They've been working for them, but it's a huge challenge. And I think overtourism will either disrupt their income or, will not allow them to be part of the mainstream tourism.
Thank you, Amran. Would anyone else like to comment on local communities?
Well, it's a love-hate relationship here. I'm both a Park Service employee, of course, but also a resident of the town. And while it's great for business, many locals are kept away from using and visiting their downtown because it has reached a point where it's just beyond anything people want to deal with, just to go food shopping or have a dinner out. And so it does push out residents from really enjoying their own town.
I think one of the really interesting things we saw during COVID was as local people were starting to rediscover their own destinations and saying, actually, we quite like it with fewer people around, and like reclaiming their own spaces. And I think people are going to become more vocal in destinations about areas that they feel very close to. So thank you. We're going to move now to close for the next session. So I'd like to thank all of you very much for your really fantastic presentations, this really interesting discussion. We are going to move on to our next session, which is on sustainable tourism blueprints and solutions. Please, panelists, if you have the time, please stay with us for the session. And if you're able to answer more of the questions in the chat, as you say, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. For those of you who are participating, you can stay on this Zoom link and there will be a brief interlude while we get ready for the next session. Thank you all very much.